with us? How can we expect to bring someone else to an admission of their wrongs, their faults, and the need to be reconciled with the Lord if we won't do that ourselves? Galatians 6:1. In Galatians 6:1, we read, "Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted." I think there are two key points here. We're focusing on gently restore. That's what the book is going to focus on. And the idea here is that that restoration process can't be forced upon somebody. We've all been in disputes, and you can't just tell somebody, look, obviously this is the right thing. Why don't you believe it? We'd love it if it was that simple, but it's not. It's a gentle process. We have to work with them. We have to understand where they are. And the end of the verse there, if I can find my verse again, lest you also be tempted. Again, in the whole process of gently working with others, we have to remember, calling back to the previous section, our own position, our own wrongfulness before the Lord, and our own reconciliation with the Lord. We should not come across as haughty. Again, we'll dig into this more later, but finally, the last section of the study is go and be reconciled. So I'm going to turn to Matthew 5, verse 24. Actually, Matthew 5, verse 24. We read, and this is in the section on murder begins in the heart. I'm going to start with verse 23, actually. "Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift." Reconciliation is not just a recognition that there is a problem or coming to a begrudging, well, yeah, that's what you think, this is what I think, we'll move along and everything will work itself out. Reconciliation is a reconciling. It's being made right. And that's a complex topic. There is a lot to that. There's no one right answer. So that is the last section. Once we reviewed, the goal is the glorification of God. We have to be real with ourselves before we can expect to help someone else. We need to gently work to restore others. Finally, we have to seek reconciliation. Now, like I said, this will probably be somewhere in the 9 to 12 lessons, depending on how this breaks out. So each of those topics will get 2 or 3 lessons down the road as we go on. But that's the high-level breakdown of where this lesson plan is going. So for this morning's topic, getting launched into this, I want to look at conflict and our responses to conflict. Conflict provides opportunity. It may not seem like it in the time. You may not see a conflict and think, oh, hey, this is an opportunity to do something good. This is an opportunity to glorify God. That's not the first thing that comes in our mind generally when we're presented with conflict. I first heard this concept actually in a work context many years ago. I used to talk about projects. We'd find out something new was coming up. I'd go to my manager, oh, we have a problem. He says, no, we have an opportunity. And I thought it was cheesy. It was very cheesy in that context. I felt fine. It's an opportunity. We'll address this opportunity. But when we're looking at this topic, conflict resolution from a biblical perspective, conflict does provide opportunity. It provides opportunity for us to approach the subject in a healthy way and grow closer to the Lord. It provides an opportunity to help someone else in their walk with the Lord to grow closer to Him as well. At minimum, there are those 2 opportunities in any conflict situation. There may be more depending on the particular conflict. So when we're looking at conflict and what those opportunities are, it is very important to consider how we're going to respond. So we're going to look at responses this morning in 3 different categories broken across a range. I think I gave you guys a little, it's not a picture, but it's a word picture, if you will, on 2A. We're going to look at conflict responses in 3 categories. On one side, if you view the response to conflict as a spectrum, On one side, you have escape responses. I just want to get out of this problem. I just want it to go away. And that presents itself and breaks down in various ways. On the other side of the spectrum, you have attack. I'm going to attack this thing head on. I'm going to force this to be right. I'm going to, whatever the case may be, you're not just going to set aside and hope the problem goes away. You're going to address it, but not in a right and healthy way. Between the two of those, and if I walk away from the mic too much, let me know. Between the two of those is where the peacemaking responses lie. If you're seeking to make peace, you are actively engaging, but without attacking, okay? If you're seeking to make peace, you are seeking. You can't walk away. You can't do nothing. So again, in the middle is where those peacemaking responses lie. We're going to break down each of these three areas then with some particular examples of what those responses might look like. And it's important to recognize, I can't remember if I called this out earlier, I think I did. Conflict is not always external. We have to consider, again, coming back to those things. One, how do we glorify God in addressing this conflict? We have to examine ourselves, our motives, and our position in relation to the conflict, and then we look to others. So in each of these things, there are going to be varying degrees of involvement of others, and we'll touch on that more in a little bit. But remember to always look at this from the perspective of self first. How does this impact me? How am I part of this? And what do I need to do or address in the situation? So the first response is escape. Sometimes it may seem that the easiest way to get out of conflict or out of trouble is just to get away from it. However, again, if we come back to the perspective of glorifying God, ignoring a problem, walking away from it, hoping things just get better, is not an active attempt to glorify the Lord in this situation. Fundamentally, any of these approaches are wrong because they don't consider how God can be glorified in resolving this situation. First example we're going to look at is denial. And by the way, this is by no means an exhaustive list of responses in these categories. As we go through these things, there are three examples in each of these categories. I'm sure you could draw other examples from your life, but these are three kind of core examples that feed us along this path. So denial. Pretend the problem just doesn't exist or ignore it. Maybe if I don't look at it, it will go away. This will just take care of itself and I'll never have to worry about it again. Or maybe it's not really a problem. Maybe it's not really a problem. People think it might be, or I thought it was at first, but it's not really a problem. It'll just go away. Let's look at Genesis 16, verses 1 through 6. Genesis 16, 1 through 6. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "See now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her." And Abram heeded the voice of Sarai. Then Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. So he went into Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. Then Sarai said to Abram, "My wrong is upon you. I have given my maid to your embrace. When she saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between you and me." So Abram said to Sarai, "Indeed, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as you please." And when Sarai dealt harshly with her, she fled from her presence. Now, we have a couple different examples in here, so we're going to come back to these verses a little bit, actually, when we come to, I think we're going to come back to these. I switched up verses a few times, but I think we're going to come back to these. In any case, clearly, well, not clearly here. When I was first considering this verse, it took me a little while. It didn't jump out at me initially where denial as an approach to conflict came in. It was further on in rereading this that it finally clicked. Maybe you guys saw it already. The denial here is on the part of Abram. So conflict is a result of actions, of something. We said that before. It may be small, maybe large. There were a series of mistakes here that led to this particular conflict. And the conflict at hand is that now Sarai's servant doesn't respect her, is disrespecting her, depending on your interpretation of this particular passage. But now the conflict has arisen between Hagar and Sarai, where Hagar is not in some way doing what Sarai, her master, is expecting. So Sarai brings the problem to Abram and says, hey, you caused this mess. You got to fix it. Abram says, well, do whatever you think is right. Abram had an opportunity here to get involved in a problem that he did very actively participate in creating, but instead he handed it off to Sarai. Said, you know what? You can take care of this. You deal with it. You do whatever you think is right. He did not get involved in the situation. This was denial in if I ignore this problem, hopefully it will go away. Someone else will take care of it. I don't need to get involved. So that's our first example. I want to turn to 1 Samuel 2, 22 through 25. And I don't think I said earlier, by the way, if anybody has any questions, thoughts, additional along the way here, feel free to raise your hand or speak up. It's always easier to incorporate thoughts or feedback or questions at the time than try and remember what I was saying later on. So, okay, 1 Samuel 2, 22 through 25. Now Eli was very old, and he heard everything his sons did to all Israel, and how they lay with the women who assembled at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. So he said to them, why do you do such things? For I hear your evil dealings from all the people. No, my sons, for it is not a good report that I hear. You make the Lord's people transgress. If one man sins against another, God will judge him. But if a man sins against the Lord, who will intercede for him? Nevertheless, they did not heed the voice of their father, because the Lord desired to kill them. Now, in this case, as we often see in the Old Testament, we immediately get a reason for why they responded incorrectly. The Lord desired to kill them. We see that also in the case of Pharaoh. The Lord hardened his heart. There was a reason that we're given immediately for the reaction. However, that does not change the fact of their response. Nevertheless, they did not heed the voice of their father. They said, it's not a big deal. This isn't a problem. They were in denial as to the seriousness of the things that they had done. That was their reaction to this conflict, which their father made them aware of. I want to move on to the next point, flight. So sometimes denial isn't enough. We can say, well, you know what? It's not there, but it keeps persisting. It keeps raising its ugly head, if you will. And so now we just need to get away. So running away from the problem or flight could include a number of things. Just walking away in the moment. Somebody approaches you about something. I'm not going to listen. I'm going over here. Have a good day, right? Or it could include cutting someone out of your life. You know what? We're just not going to invite them over for dinner anymore. I'm not going to go to lunch with him. We're not going to see them on the weekends. We're just not going to associate with those people anymore. It could include leaving a job, or even leaving a church, or even as extreme as moving to another place entirely. I don't want to deal with this problem. I'm just going to move. You know what? I hear the taxes are great in Utah. I'll make up another excuse. I'll go over there to get away from a problem that we don't want to address. So back to Genesis. I thought we came back here. Genesis 16, 6 through 8. Should have kept a finger in that. Okay, Genesis 16, 6 through 8. So Abram said to Sarai, indeed, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as you please. And when Sarai dealt harshly with her, her being Hagar, she fled from her presence. Now the angel of the 6 through 8, is this right? Yeah. Now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur, and said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, where have you come from, and where are you going? She said, I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai. She fled. Now, there may have been some reasonable, we don't know what the nature of Sarai's reaction was there when it said she dealt harshly with her. It could be that there was, maybe she gave her extra work. Maybe she actually sought to beat her. There was some concern for safety. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. What we do see here, though, is as a response to conflict, she fled. She ran away. And we can understand that. I think most of us have probably been in a position where something's come up and you said, you know what, I'm just going to walk away from it. Or we've wanted to. Man, I really wish I could just get away from this situation. It's also worth noting that at times it may be right to flee temporarily. There may be times when a situation presents itself and you're too emotional, or for whatever reason, now you cannot address that problem properly, and you know that. And if you try and say something now, you're just going to make the situation worse. Sometimes it is okay to walk away, but it's never okay to walk away with the idea of escape and not coming back to it. In those situations, it's still important that we come back to it, that we address the problem. So temporary escape is okay, but escape for the purpose of just getting away is not. Another example, so coming back to personal safety then, 1 Samuel 19, 9 through 10. Let's look at 1 Samuel 19. This is one, again, like all of the verses, I'm sure, so far that we're very familiar with. 1 Samuel 19, 9 and 10. Now the distressing spirit from the Lord came upon Saul as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand, and David was playing music with his hand. Then Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he slipped away from Saul's presence, and he drove the spear into the wall. So David fled and escaped that night. David was presented with conflict. Very real conflict. He had a spear thrown at him, and he had every reason to believe that if he stayed in that place, Paul would continue to try to kill him. It was okay, it was right for him to flee that situation. However, as we know, I should have put the reference in here. As we know, this was not the only time that that Paul tried to kill Saul, thank you. Thank you. This was not the only time that Saul tried to kill David. And we see again and again that David returned to Saul to try to reconcile their differences. David never fled and stayed away. He stayed away for safety, but he again returned to try to resolve those differences. Time check. How are we doing? Am I already pretty much at time? How much time do I have left? About 2 minutes. Oh, well, we're not going to get through this outline today. Never mind. We're going to pick this outline up again next week. I thought I broke this into a chunk that I could handle today. Okay, so flight. And again, it's when we're looking at that, because there's also an element of attack here. As we break down other responses later, we'll come back to this one particularly. This will come up again. So I want to get into the last here, and I'm not going to dwell on this one, but the final example here for escape is suicide. And we're all very aware of this problem, especially today. It seems like we hear about this more and more in the news. We hear more and more statistics. Suicide is a form of escape. It is getting away from all of your problems. It is a drastic step taken when there doesn't seem to be any other way out. I want to look quickly at 1 Samuel 31:4, just probably a couple pages over in your Bible. Then Saul said to his armor, so Saul is at war in the fields, as I'm sure everybody's familiar with the story. Then Saul said to his armor bearer, draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised men, the kings they were at war with, come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell on it. What I want to get out of this passage in this example, I think really all we can take from this to apply here is how extreme the troubles were that Paul was experiencing at this time, how extreme his hopelessness was, how extreme his fears were that drove him to this point as his only recourse, his last option for escape. And specifically then, when we think of and when we recognize suicide as a response to conflict, that is something that someone would do because of conflict, it should become shockingly clear how important it is for us to understand proper approaches to resolution, proper peacemaking, not only for how to help ourselves, but for how to help others, and to teach those to others, to teach proper conflict resolution to our children, to teach proper conflict resolution to others as we're enabled, and to exemplify that for them so that they see and understand and know what their options truly are, so that we can help them through and hopefully never even to reach or come near that level of desperation. Okay, I had planned, man, that is not the topic I wanted to end today's lesson on. I thought I'd be touching that and moving on. But if we are at time, I guess I will open up for questions. Any questions, other thoughts?
I think you can see, everyone can see themselves in
Yes, the comment was everyone can see themselves every day in that outline. And that, I think, comes back to that getting the log out of our own eye. If we're not seeing ourselves thus far in this outline, we have some introspection to do. We have some reality to check, because yes, we absolutely should see, we absolutely do experience these types of conflict. And even, I dare say, as we read through these incorrect responses, we'll see these tendencies in ourselves as well. Our natural response is not. And those around you, yes. You will see the incorrect tendencies in yourself and those around you. The closer they are, yes, the more you'll probably see them. So we'll learn how to help them through that. We'll learn how to help them to respond correctly. Okay, yes, but we should see some of this in each of us and learn to respond appropriately. Other questions, thoughts, comments?
Maybe just to make people aware, as we mentioned, teaching your kids through it, there is also a companion book called The Young Peacemakers, which is directed at communication with kids. So if anybody's interested, that might also be a resource.
Yeah, so on the mic, the pastor was just saying, so we've mentioned, it's the importance of teaching these things to your children. There is a companion book, I believe it was also written by Ken Sande, that goes along with this. What'd you say it was called? The Young Peacemakers? So it's specifically intended for working through with your children and teaching them how to handle and properly address conflict. And if anybody wants, I can provide links to the books on Amazon also. Let me know. So, all right. Well, thank you all very much. Based on this morning, either I'm going to have to clean up my lessons plans, or we're actually in for closer to 24 lessons. So we'll figure it out one way or the other. So thank you all very much, and we'll talk about this again next week.